So if you remember, we left off with the neutrality of the United States. And obviously we are going to eventually be entering the war, and that's what we're going to talk about in this video, is making that transition and what sort of is all the things that are going to push us from neutrality to a war declaration. So the German bombing of London in the Battle of Britain and the air raids really shook a lot of Americans out of their neutral stance, because they realized that civilians were being harmed and even targeted. And then the next thing that's really going to take all of those feelings to the next level is going to be something called the Tripartite Pact. So the Tripartite Pact is the formal alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan. When these three countries sign an official alliance with each other, this makes this finally an official world war. Now it's not just three wars happening simultaneously, one in Asia with Japan, one in Europe with Germany, one in Africa with Italy. It is now spread across all three of those continents, all one war, because now when something happens with one, it directly implicates the other two. So the United States, in response, will pass the first and only ever Peacetime Selective Service Act to draft and train 1.2 million troops every year. This is a massive conscription act, okay? That's just who we're drafting. That's not going to include all the people that are going to volunteer. And believe me, plenty of guys are going to volunteer. So FDR is even going to give 50 old World War I battleships to Great Britain to use and have and stuff. During this, in 1940, he is going to be reelected for his third term. A lot of Americans didn't feel it was smart to change presidents during such a crisis, so he does choose to run for a third term, because in 1940 we didn't have term limits. Every other president had just decided not to run after 2 terms, but that's different here for FDR. So when he gives his third inauguration speech on January 6th of 1941, he talks about the 4 freedoms that democracy is made to protect: the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, and the freedom from fear. He says that all 4 of these things are being threatened specifically right now by Nazi and Japanese militants, and he says that it's America's responsibility to be this great arsenal for democracy. So he's essentially saying that we should be the weapon supplier for the Allied powers in Europe. So in March of 1941, he'll act on that, and Congress will pass something called the Lend-Lease Act, where it will give FDR the power to lend, lease, or otherwise give away any federal defensive article. This is essentially an economic declaration of war. We're now going to be financially supporting the war, and we're going to be supporting the war with supplies. Even if we don't have boots on the ground, we're now really directly implicated. And our alliance with Great Britain is clearly very, very strong. In August of 1941, FDR and Winston Churchill will meet in secret off the coast of Newfoundland, which is in Canada. And they will sign something called the Atlantic Charter, which is essentially a mutual agreement to an international system of general security. It pretty much just deepens the alliance between the United States and Great Britain. Now, Hitler wasn't a total idiot. He knew about the Atlantic Charter. He knew that the Allies were getting help from the United States. He even knew that we had been sending weapons to Iceland, and then Great Britain was going to Iceland to pick them up. We were doing this sort of off paper, under the table situation. So in the fall of 1941, Hitler, knowing that we're essentially an enemy of his, orders German subs to attack U.S. ships. So German U-boats will first fire at a ship called the USS Greer, but they will miss. But just firing at a U.S. ship is an act of war, so we could have declared war right then, but we don't. After that, the U-boats will come across another ship, the USS Kearney. It will fire and hit the USS Kearney, but it will not sink it. Once again, we don't declare war, and then U-boats will actually hit and sink the USS Reuben James, killing more than 100 sailors in the process. We still don't declare war on Germany, because we want to try to do everything we can to avoid that, because we really, really are worried about our economic situation at the moment. Remember, we're in the Great Depression. So even though we're still going to be technically neutral, we're going to be in this sort of like non-official war with Germany, because right after that, FDR is going to order United States ships to shoot any German ships on sight. So after this, Hitler is going to make one of his biggest mistakes ever. If you remember, Hitler and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact agreeing to both invade Poland and split up the land and take it for themselves. They do that in 1939. Hitler had made it clear to his own people that his big picture goal was eventually to take over Russia. He just wanted to deal with the West first and then focus on the East, because remember, he does not want to have to fight a two-front war. Now, in June of 1940, Russia is going to invade the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which sit right around here along the Baltic Sea. These three countries are right in this little piece. And they were made up of land that we had taken from Russia at the end of World War I. These were three new countries. Now Germany, Hitler is going to see this happen, and he's thinking now might be the time to turn on Stalin, because he can use this as an excuse and sort of blame the fracture and the abandonment of the non-aggression pact on Stalin. So he says, that Stalin betrayed him and broke the pact so that it was voided, and now he's going to declare war on Russia. This makes it clear that it's only a matter of time before the United States has to join, because more and more countries are getting involved. Now, this is such a big mistake, because he thought that he had finished off the West enough to where he could wipe that out pretty shortly and then focus on the Soviet Union, that he wouldn't have to fight a two-front war. What he doesn't count on is American involvement in the war shortly, which is going to give the Western theater of the war a new boost, and he will have to fight a two-front war, and it's going to be a really big problem for him. So what's going to get us into the war? Japan is going to get us into the war. Now, even though the United States and Japan had been allies in World War I, tensions had started to form between the two. Japan wants all of Asia, and the United States' presence in Guam and the Philippines really threatens that. Japan imperialism also threatens our empire. Now, the United States is also really supportive of China, and as Japan continues to take more control over China, that relationship is more strained. But the relationship between the two was almost necessary, since Japan really relied on the United States for shipments of natural resources. We provided them with a lot of natural resources, and we liked the income. So as the Japanese get further into China, FDR finally feels like he wants to stop their expansion, so he's going to try to do that with some trade restrictions. He will place an embargo on Japan. If you remember, an embargo, all the way back to Thomas Jefferson, an embargo is a ban on exports. So he's going to ban products being sent to Japan, such as oil, iron, fuel, steel, and rubber. When Japan enters to the Tripartite Pact in 1940, he will sign another embargo, increasing the amount of things that are going to be restricted. As Japan expands their reach, they're able to get the products they need from their new territory, so it's going to end up sort of backfiring and not really working. So in 1941, General Hideki Tojo is going to become the new Prime Minister of Japan, and he's really going to be calling the shots. His nickname is the Razor, and he wants to keep expanding, but he doesn't want to bring the fight to the United States, because he knows that economic relationship is so important. So through the whole summer of 1941, he will be trying to end disagreements with the United States, and we're going to be on the phone with Japan all the time, trying to negotiate and come up with some type of solution. Unfortunately, by November, Japan felt that they had reached, a point where they were no longer, where it was clear that the two of us were never going to agree. So at that point, they give up on peace and start planning to deliver the first blow to the United States, which will be the attack on Pearl Harbor. So on the morning of December 7th of 1941, which was a Sunday, Hawaii, specifically the island of, sorry, I think my mic went out for a minute. I had to do some fiddling to get that back on track. But anyway, so our naval base in Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii. So this is our main naval base in the Pacific. So any work that we're ever doing in the Philippines or Guam or any other Asian or Pacifically located place, those ships and that aircraft is being sent from our base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. So Tojo's plan is to completely wipe out our naval presence, which is not only ships but aircraft as well. He wants to wipe out that naval presence in Hawaii and in the Pacific. So on the morning of December 7th, he sends 6 aircraft carriers, 360 planes, a bunch of battleships, bunch of cruisers, and even some submarines, and they begin to bomb our base at Pearl Harbor. Many battleships will be sunk, including the USS Arizona, Oklahoma, and Utah. Arizona was definitely the largest. Thousands of Americans were killed when that ship was sunk. Close to 2,500 Americans will be killed at Pearl Harbor in all. 8 battleships damaged, 3 destroyers totally unusable, 3 flight cruisers will be damaged, 160 aircraft totally destroyed, and 128 more aircraft damaged. The U.S. battle fleet in the Pacific will be out of commission for almost 6 months. This is an absolutely devastating blow, not only to our country, but to our military. This is just a really horrible situation. We had never been attacked on U.S. ground before, especially out of the blue. And in the eyes of the United States, we were still in negotiations with Japan. We didn't get the notice that they were ending negotiations until the attack had actually already begun. And the fleet in the Pacific will actually only just barely survive because a lot of our carriers were actually out to sea at the time. Because they were doing drills, and because the Japanese general decided not to go look for them or send in a third wave of the attack. He did send 2 waves. He didn't send a third. We were able to have some ships make it through the attack, and that's going to give us just enough to get what we need to get back up on our feet in the Pacific and enter the war. So that on that day, on December 7th, FDR got on the radio and announced to the United States what had been going on, because as word of the attack spread, people really started freaking out, and they really rallied together. I know you're too young to remember 9/11, but it is very similar in the impact that it had on the United States. And immediately everyone knew things were going to change. So Roosevelt addressed the nation over the radio, and immediately after he asked the House of Representatives to declare war on Japan, and they do. The House of Representatives votes 388 to 1 in favor of war. Obviously that one was Jeanette Rankin, and then the Senate voted unanimously. So we do enter the war on December 8th, that next day of 1941. So technically we enter the war in 1941, but our fighting really won't begin until 1942 because we're going to need some time to mobilize. So now that we've declared war on Japan, Germany and Italy are going to stick to their alliance and declare war on the United States. So we are officially 100% involved and signed up for World War II.